Hey guys, it's me Cosmic, and today we're going to talk about the history of the furry fandom as well as the history of anthropomorphism by extension. Now, this will also be a history of anthropomorphism at the same time, since anthro-animals are what the furry fandom is all about. Well, it's also about the community, but the second biggest thing is anthropomorphism. The appreciation and creation of them, to be specific. So what is anthropomorphism?
Goes
What are you, some kind of furry?
You're the one here wearing an animal suit.
Anthropomorphism, in its most simple form, is giving human traits to either objects or animals. And although the furry fandom became a thing all the way back in the 90s as well as 80s, some do argue that it was around during the 70s as well, but I'm not too sure about that one. So I'm gonna go with the 80s and 90s. Anthropomorphism, however, has been around since the very beginning of time. Sometimes it was for simple entertainment reasons, and sometimes it was for important spiritual and religious reasons. The oldest known anthro artwork is the Lion Man statue that was discovered in Germany. Although it is possible that one day even an older anthropomorphic artwork gets discovered in the future, we simply just haven't found it yet. It's possible. Now, another ancient act of anthropomorphizing is calling ships a she, despite the ship itself not being a living organic being that would have a sex or gender. This tradition of anthropomorphizing has lasted for centuries now. And even during our own childhoods, we tend to anthropomorphize our toys all the time. Remember back when you were a kid and you had a plushie, and you would give it a name, you would play with it, you would talk with it as if it was another human being, you assigned human traits to it. Well, that is anthropomorphizing that object. So anthropomorphism is a very ancient thing that us humans have had an appreciation for centuries now. However, we can't truly call these ancient ones furry, because our understanding of a furry formed during the 80s and 90s. Thus, calling them a furry simply just wouldn't be accurate, as even the idea of our modern day furry didn't really exist back then. Now, according to a fandom historian, Fred Patton, the concept of furry originated at a science fiction convention back in 1980 when a character drawing from Steve Galaki's Albedo Anthropomorphics started a discussion of anthropomorphic characters in science fiction novels. Now, although I haven't ever read this book before, I do plan on eventually getting my hands on one of these and starting to read them, because I am interested in this. I am pretty curious. But the point is, us humans have had an interest as well as practice of anthropomorphism for centuries now. Thus, it's no surprise that over time, eventually, furries became a thing. Now, as I said before, our modern day understanding of furries came to be during the 80s and 90s. The furry fandom emerged from the underground sci-fi scene, born from a very nerdy and geeky place. And unfortunately, these people were also usually the quote-unquote weird ones, and thus usually outcasts. But fortunately, this also resulted in many other quote-unquote weird ones and outcasts being able to connect with the furries and become furries themselves later on in the future. Neurodivergent people, odd people, introverted people that felt alienated, LGBT folk, and so on began to see the furry fandom as a secondary home of sorts as a result of this, where they can be how they are without worrying about unnecessarily harsh judgment or just unfair judgment. This is the biggest reason why the furry fandom is huge on understanding, acceptance, and self-expression, as long as it's in a reasonable level, of course. These were also the times where the furry fandom was at its smallest, but over time, the furry fandom would grow large enough to host the very first furry convention. The first furry convention was to be held back in mid-1986 in California. The furry fandom would continue being a small fandom for a few more years and slowly become larger. Now, today, there are about 1.4 to 2.8 million furries worldwide. And although when compared to many other fandoms that's still on the smaller side, it is still a pretty significant increase. To give you an example, the anime community is about 50 million strong worldwide. So obviously, when you compare it to fandoms like that, the furry fandom is still very tiny and small. Now, over time, the furry community will most likely continue expanding. Again, probably very slowly, but, we can continue expanding. The furry fandom has unfortunately had to deal with harsh judgment and misinformation for many years now, almost since the very beginning. However, that is a topic for a different day, so I'm not going to get too deep into it in this one. When it comes to furry drama, that isn't a recent development either. There has unfortunately always been at least a handful of dickheads around that, caused issues. At one point, the furry fandom straight up had its own equivalent of a civil war. The burned furs and the improved anthropomorphics, as well as a handful more, are where that whole civil war thing came from. Now, because I know very little of this specific event, I will instead link a video on the description that does a better job explaining the burned furs and that whole civil war thing. Now, civil war is probably a bit, exaggerating it, but come on now, which one sounds cooler? A minor disagreement that got toxic, or a civil war? Come on now, which one gets more attention? Now, another thing is the furry fandom has always, and most likely continue to always have, three main pillars to the community. The community aspect, the creative aspect, art, self-expression. The community part is, it's self-explanatory. It's having a community that you can be a part of and interact with. Art comes in many forms, not just traditional or digital drawings or paintings, but also sculpting, fursuit making, writing, and so on. These are forms of art. These have always been one of the biggest focuses in the furry fandom and will most likely continue being. And then self-expression, which again, it's usually done via the form of art. And yeah, that's going to be about it for this video. Before I end this video, I just want to say good news. I found an adopter for Lucky and gave him to her. He will now have a chicken-friendly environment and will get to socialize with his own kind now. I kinda do miss him a little bit, but at the same time, the only thing I can do is keep him alive. But that's it. I can't provide it its other needs, and obviously this is a chicken. It needs to be with other chickens and socialize and go outside, feel the dirt on its claws and so on. That one I couldn't provide. So it's going to be better for him to stay with her anyways. But yeah, that's going to be about it for this video. I hope you enjoyed it, and I will see you later some other time. Goodbye.